inauguration party, and congratulations on the 5-year birth of this book.
Thank you very much.
You've been working a long time on it, and on a long and distinguished writing career that many more should know about. And welcome very much to Conversations. The guest is Russell W. Baker, or Russ Baker. That's relevant and perhaps to what we could discuss briefly. He's a writer extraordinaire, if I may say so here personally, having read a great deal of his work. And he's the author. He's written many articles, feature articles for major publications, Vanity Fair, publications across the spectrum, New York Times, Post, and so forth. And he's now written a book that he has finished 5 years research on. As you can see, it's called Family of Secrets, a major study of the Bush family. And Russ, welcome really very, very much to Conversations.
Thank you, Errol.
My pleasure. Could you, bear with me a little bit and share your own background? This is going to be the Russ Baker Hour.
Sure.
Maybe you're born and raised, education, a little bit like that. We'll wade in, okay?
Born and raised in the beach cities of Los Angeles, near Venice. I got my bachelor's degree in political science from UCLA, and then obtained a master's in journalism from the Columbia Graduate School of Journalism.
Okay. That's good, yeah.
Been in New York for quite a while.
Okay, you're in New York. You think of yourself as a New Yorker?
At this point, I do.
Yeah, great town, I think.
It is good. It's a good place to think in.
I think it is. They got 192 countries at the United Nations. We have sizable communities of 189 of them in the New York City area. It's really an interesting place to be. You've picked up, you've been writing now, journalism. You've been writing these feature articles and so forth. When did you get going? Coming out of graduate school, let's say. When did you get started? Where did you get started? Are you freelance, or where do you stand?
I call myself independent.
Okay, and, that's a better term.
Once in a while, I've taken a paycheck from a news organization, but it suits me to chart my own course.
Yeah.
I got a master's in '88. And left immediately for Central Africa, where I covered Hutu Tutsi massacres, precursors to what happened in Rwanda.
Before the big one there.
Yes, that was before that. I then, in '89, went to Germany before the wall came down. I was there actually when the Berlin Wall came down. I reported
Johnny on
the
that. Spot, right?
Yeah, I covered that for news organizations all over the world, did radio and newspaper articles. Then later in '89, I was back in Romania, and I was there just as Nicolae Ceausescu was overthrown, so I covered that.
Boy.
'91, I was in the former Soviet republics just as they were breaking away. Yeah, I've had an opportunity to see a bit of history.
Are you on a stringer basis with some of the major news organizations?
I have been sometimes. I had some regular, ongoing relationships, but usually in these situations, I just go because it's one of the perks of independent journalism that you can be right up front in the front row to history. And usually these news organizations, if they know my work, they say, well, great, if you're going to be there, we'll take some stuff.
Yeah, I think to know you is to love you, because you write well. Okay, and serious scholarship and so on. It was very interesting to me. You went to what was Rwanda or something before. So you would have had, I'm just curious, huh?
It was Burundi, right next door to Rwanda.
Well, Burundi, but you were in that area. But had you sensed from your reading of the human condition or something that was going to be where something was going to happen? Do you sense things ahead of when it becomes the flash news story of the hour or the minute?
I wish I could say I was prescient. I mean, things were already, things were starting to happen in Burundi. They'd had some horrible massacres over the course of several days, but the world's attention was not focusing on it, and I made a quick decision in consultation with a friend who worked for a European news organization that this was a story worth pursuing, and that not much of the media was going to be going there, and that's why I thought it was important to be an eyewitness.
It wasn't it was a conscious choice on your part that this is the place to be, rather than you happen to be there when something happened.
Right, and there was something already beginning to happen.
And you had sensed it.
Well, I sensed it because it had already happened. So it was just that it wasn't getting attention.
Right. Well, I'm getting. Somebody said once the artist said the intent of the race, that sort of thing. They pick up on things. They know what's going on. They got a feel for where something's going to be developed.
Well, I mean, I thought this was going to possibly spread and grow, and as we saw later on with Rwanda, it certainly was magnified.
How did you happen to be in Romania before Ceausescu fell?
Well, I had a feeling.
Sometimes it could be, well, you just had a great party with the lady or something, you happened to be there and it happened. Do you know what I'm saying?
No, I mean,
but you're consciously setting a pattern, understanding the evolution of the human condition and that sort of thing.
I mean, I had just come back from East Germany and saw the writing on the wall, and I thought, boy, Romania is an interesting place because he's got such a lock on that country.
Right.
People were in total terror. It was much more a lockdown than most of the other Eastern Bloc countries, and it wasn't clear what was going to happen, but I thought that something would happen, and so I was already had sort of pitched the story and was on my way when things began to happen. And so I was one of the first reporters into the country.
Good for you.
As everything broke down. Good
for you. I can remember having read George Kennan and all the containment theory and all that kind of stuff, and the bipolar world with the Soviet Union. And I noticed our CIA intelligence agencies and so forth, in a certain sense, admit to, and did in a certain sense, sort of missed the coming downfall of the Soviet Union. They were still all caught up within the pattern coming out of history. They sort of missed this story with all of their resources to be able to smell out where things are majorly happening. You're an independent. You can be in those venues and sniff things out in advance of when they actually hit. That's what I'm getting at.
Right. I mean, well, one of my critiques of the intelligence community is that you've got it sort of, it's bifurcated between intelligence gathering and proactive covert action, and where they seem to be much more effective is in the covert action, which is raises serious questions about the legitimacy of those things, whereas intelligence gathering, which is an appropriate activity of any organization, they don't necessarily always score that high.
They're not so intelligent necessarily. They don't have a very high Q rating. They seem to be tunnel vision, and they don't see things in a big pattern, or it seems to me that they've got tunnel vision or something.
They're not necessarily.
They don't communicate. And that's internationally. So we really don't know, in a certain sense, in a distant early warning sense, like McLuhan used to write about, the happenings that are coming, and we're sort of blinkered or driving into the future with our eye on the rearview mirror too much.
The intelligence community in the United States has typically recruited from too narrow a slice of humanity, and to some extent that's what my book Family of Secrets is about, is this very narrow slice of humanity who sort of made the rise of the Bushes possible. Those are the same people who very much have dominated the intelligence community.
Have those same kind of people dominated the intelligence community, informing the political process throughout a good deal of human history?
I don't know about all of human history, but I will say certainly in terms of American history, since the CIA was created in the 1940s.
Came out of the OSS, I guess, or
it was somewhat of a different group. The OSS actually had a somewhat a more varied group of people, because that was wartime, and wartime you just do get some more diversity. But CIA was very much created out of the Ivy League schools.
Well, our establishment comes out of the Ivy League schools, I think, in a very real sense. It's like an agent regime or something at the time of Versailles. I was thinking, you put this book we're going to be talking majorly about, but, it was 5 years of research. So you must have 5 years ago got the idea that there would be the need for a book to come out on the week that Mr. Bush leaves office, with a book that showed what the reality was there. So that's 5 years prescient, getting ready for the future. Or how did the book come about?
Well, I think
a book is a major thing, different than a piece for a newspaper, news piece, much less even a featured article. I mean, you understand what I'm saying?
I do. I think you're too kind on the prescience front. Basically, there was a sort of a perfect storm of circumstances that resulted in coming out when it did, although I have to credit my publisher, Bloomsbury, because they wanted the book to come out when it came out. This was their sense that it was the right time, right in the final weeks of the George W. Bush administration. I got the idea to do this book, again, on a foreign trip. It was in 2002, I was asked to go to the former Yugoslavia. Very often there are these programs where people in different fields go. It's not the Peace Corps, but they go for a little while and they work with people and they train them. And I was asked to go and work with journalists over there and try to sort of teach them some investigative skills and to give them a toolkit so that they could investigate abuses of power in their own countries and sort of help foster a vibrant democracy coming out of the ashes of the horrific wars of that region. And so I was there in 2002. I ended up becoming fascinated with the region and staying on well past my the short period that I was supposed to be there. And so I was still there in 2004. I was there in the run-up to the Iraq invasion, and I noticed a sea change in public opinion toward the United States, both in the former Yugoslavia as well as throughout Europe as I would travel around. People who had formerly been so enthusiastic about the United States as sort of the shining beacon of the values that they all aspire to. And so as soon as this, it became very clear to people everywhere but in the United States that this war was being sold under misleading circumstances, and it was very clear to me, and I wrote some articles back in 2002, 2003, saying that it seemed to me clear from the evidence that this was wholly unnecessary, this war.
Iraq.
And so basically what happened was, when I got back to the States in early 2004, I said to myself, how did we get in this situation? And the larger question was, how did we end up with this very unusual man as President of the United States? He's an unusual fellow to rise to the top in anything, and certainly of the government of the United States, and to be really the most powerful person in the world. And I've always been interested in these assessments that take place later where other countries have sort of had truth commissions or tried to figure out what happened to their country that they ended up where they were. And I had a sense that there really wasn't enough of a discussion of this. And I was sort of, it seemed bizarre to me that more people weren't interested in the simple question, how did George W. Bush get to the top? And what did this mean? Was this just happenstance? Was it the brilliant strategies of Karl Rove? Was it George W. Bush's personality? Was it a fluke? Was it that his opponents maybe were not as strong as they could have been?
PAC Supreme Court?
Was it the Supreme Court? Was it the hanging chads? Was it all of these things and more? And so not knowing the answer, and I almost never know the answer when I go in and do a story. And it seems to me to do good journalism, you shouldn't know the answer before you start.
That's interesting.
And you shouldn't have an agenda.
Okay, really? Okay,
you should not have an agenda. You know, and so I was willing to find out that there were no answers, or there were answers that surprised me.
Well, you came from L.A., Joe Friday's territory, just the facts, ma'am, or to
just
get
the facts.
Get the reality.
That's right. I express my opinions once I have the facts. But in any case, so what I did was I came back here and I began traveling around the country on a sort of a quest for answers, just talking to all kinds of people. And
did you have the contract for the book by then?
I had nothing, and I had very little money actually to go on, and I just sort of dug into my meager resources and had just enough to kind of get around the country. I spoke to people. I didn't know I was going to do a book at that point.
You're talking what year now?
2004.
The gestation of this book was beginning then, right?
Now,
you had not written other books?
This is my first book.
Book is a different thing than even a long feature article.
It's very different. You have to think in a completely
different
terms.
way. Long term.
You know, this book is 500 and some pages, and I worked very, very hard to take this enormously complicated material and this huge cast of characters and to sort of find a way to sustain the reader's interest. I wanted it to read a little bit like a John Le Carré or something like that. To be entertaining and to have a little bit of a bit of suspense.
But this is definitely nonfiction.
It's totally nonfiction. I've got 1,000 footnotes in there, and all the sources are named.
Oh, well, you had good training at the Graduate School of Columbia in making sure you do that. That's good. And then you did that, so you got interested in that, in the personality and the phenomena of the... what's the connection between George Bush and the neocon?
Well, of course,
Wolfowitz and all that.
I mean, that's all well known. I wasn't going to. I mean, many books sort of reiterate what are in other books. I think one of the strengths of Family of Secrets is that almost everything in there is unfamiliar. It was unknown to me, and it'll be unknown to anybody who picks up the book. Basically, what happened was, for the first year or two, even after I had decided I was working on a book, I still didn't have any answers, and I looked at everything. I looked at George W. Bush's businesses, his relationships. I looked at his values. I interviewed 500-600 people in the course of doing this.
Anybody in close to him or not? Or?
Yeah, there's some people who are close to him, and they're quoted in the book.
Good.
But they're not people who we've heard from before.
Is it hard to be able to get in touch with those people if you're trying to keep your access to source, as it was, without tipping your hand as to what you're going to come out with at the end or something? Yeah, it's a tricky business.
It's very different because his close friends all ask you, is this favorable or unfavorable?
They do. They ask you right up front, right?
And they actually ask you, has this been approved by the White House? They won't talk to you unless it's been approved. So I just skip those people. I skipped anybody who wanted White House clearance. Yeah.
Okay, that's interesting. This is the template
because they're
for
the people who are always quoted in the newspapers, and the newspapers don't bother to mention that these people are speaking to them because they've been cleared because what they're going to say is favorable. Yeah. Well, that to me, that's unfair to the audience.
Yeah, particularly if you've got the temperament of an investigative journalist. That's not exactly what an investigative journalist should be.
It's not. I always head in the opposite direction from the crowd. Basically.
Well, I think you're running against the grain, which might be a good idea. I mean, because you're doing that kind of thing. But then, so you did, and you interviewed a number of people. Let me just nuts and bolts. Did you tape any of it? Did you audio tape, videotape, any of the interviews?
I have a tape recorder with me, and I put it out right in front of people.
Audio only,
it's an
right?
audio tape,
not video.
No.
You didn't do that. It's so easy to carry around. It's easy. You couldn't have done that back in the old days. You had to write everything down, and then you would do it. And you got you did a lot. Did the internet help?
I use the internet heavily for my research. I do a tremendous amount of using databases, archives. So I do the old-fashioned stuff. I go and I sit in some dusty basement and look through old pieces of paper.
Like we used to have to do in the stacks. Yeah.
I assembled a collection of I think it's about 500 books simply for this project, so that I would get background information on all kinds of issues.
And you actually got those in your presence on a shelf somewhere where you?
I got a whole wall that's just books for this project.
Okay, and you arranged that yourself. Okay, good.
I went and got the books.
Right. Yeah. You're organized.
Well,
no, that's good. And
try to be organized.
Yeah, no, of course. Yeah.
Well, anyway, so what I did was at some point, as I went around collecting information, maybe a year or so in, or 2 years in.
Now we're into what year?
Oh, 2005, 2006. Basically, a few things struck me, and this is really what led me to the revelations in Family of Secrets. What struck me was that pretty much everybody said to me, you know, George W. Bush is so different from his father, and if his father really wasn't that bad a guy, and there was a sort of a rift or a falling out between them, and I thought I always examine the conventional wisdom on anything, so I thought, is that true? And I wondered about that, and I wondered, well, how could the son have been president without his father's support? And of course, he had his father's support. So I thought it's interesting that they've sort of pitched this notion of him as kind of a rebel from the family tradition, the old blue blood. Connecticut-based kind of old money situation. And the more I looked, the more I realized that was not true. That, in fact, he was very close to his father, and that he saw himself as carrying out the sort of values and the advancing the philosophy that his father, his grandfather, his great-grandfather, and the circles of powerful industrialists, military contractors, and intelligence figures had advocated all of these years. And that was really when I started realizing there was more going on than simply what was on the surface.
Maureen Dowd wrote a lot of things, Oedipal things, and the Oedipal kinds of considerations
I think that's
of
all
the
wrong.
Psychology, trying to get into the. It's really hard to know somebody else, but you're also then looking at the establishment in a very real sense. You could go, then you'll get back to things like the Funde out of Europe and the old money interest, the Illuminati and all that kind of thing, trilateral, that kind of thing. Did you come to see that as interlinking? Or?
I don't mention any of those things.
You do not?
No,
okay.
Okay.
It's family.
Yeah, no. There are definitely some interests involved here, but I avoid a lot of those labels. There's a lot on the internet where people are speculating about who's doing what.
A lot of conspiracy stuff.
I'm not a fan of that. I simply follow facts that I accumulate and connect the dots. And in the end, there's a body of theory. Whether people interpret that as being something, what is a conspiracy? A conspiracy is a category of crime that exists. It's a federal offense. It's a felony, and it's a group of people, whether it's organized crime or a bunch of people in a company who there's a pattern of working together to commit a crime, basically. In any case, what I found in my research for Family of Secrets, what I found was that they had deliberately created this smokescreen that in order to get George W. Bush into the White House, they had sold the public this bill of goods, this idea that he was this kind of aw shucks guy, and in fact he was nothing of the kind. The second half of the book is mostly about George W., and I examined the companies he was involved with, most of whom have never been scrutinized or written about before, and I found that he was involved in companies that looked to me like they were involved in some kind of covert operations, money laundering. There were all these figures coming in and out who were Saudis and people connected to Ferdinand Marcos and to the Shah of Iran and to the South African apartheid regime, and I said, these are not normal companies. They don't make any money. Their books are completely unfounded. unfathomable. And this led me to a basic question, which was, well, first of all, if they were trying to make it seem like the son was somehow alienated from the father, and if in fact the opposite was true, what did that mean? Well, basically, George W. Bush would never have been president of the United States if his father, who had the same name, had not been president. So I began focusing on the father, and the first half of Family of Secrets is about the father, because the father turns out to be this fascinating character. All we know about him is that he was supposedly an oil man, and then he became a director of the CIA for a single year.
His daddy was Prescott Bush.
His daddy was George H.W. Bush.
No. George H.W. Bush, his father was Prescott Bush.
The grandfather.
Yeah, so you could go back. I mean, you could go back. And that's like a dynasty does tend to do that over many centuries in the case of Rome and other empires.
That's right.
You know what I'm saying. Yeah.
Sure. And even the great-grandfather. And they all were connected with and working for powerful families. Like
the Fundi.
The Rockefellers and the Harrimans in particular.
Right.
In any case, what I looked at with the father was I started discovering all these questions about the father. He had been CIA director for a year in 1976, and they had said that it was odd that he would be CIA director because this was a period of ferment. There were congressional investigations going on into CIA abuses domestically and abroad, all kinds of unauthorized activities, certainly the coups that they had been carrying out all over the world. And so here they put this fellow in who was sort of a milquetoast who had no intelligence experience, and I said, it doesn't make any sense. What I discovered was indications that the father, George H.W. Bush, or Bush 41 as we call him, actually had a secret background in intelligence work all of his adult life, that he had been a sort of, you might say, working undercover when he was in the oil business and when he was a congressman, when he was an ambassador. Documents showing him in 1963, at the time of the Kennedy assassination, being in Dallas and working for the CIA, being briefed by J. Edgar Hoover. Other documents showing him all the way back in 1953 as a young man in the oil business, again starting an offshore drilling company with an active duty CIA officer, having just a handful of rigs traveling all over the world in inexplicable flurry of activity for such a tiny company with just several rigs, putting his rigs in places like right off of Cuba before the Bay of Pigs invasion. And I thought, boy, this is not a man who's trying to make a buck of the oil business. He's doing something else.
Oh, really? Yeah, it was into that kind of a thing. That's really very, very, very interesting. Yeah.
And so Family of Secrets basically sort of pulls back the curtain on this apparatus and gets into the question of who wanted the Bushes in power, who were they serving, what interest, and it explores the efforts of this sliver of the upper classes of the United States to sort of control the extraction of natural resources all over the world, gold, oil, copper, sulfur, uranium, titanium, all of these things, because this is how you control power, is you control these resources.
Could I go sidebar a little bit?
Sure.
When you studied political science, did you get in? They used to call it political economy back in the 19th century. Did you study much of economic theory, or was your thinking informed by serious considerations of geostrategic theory and so forth, and the organization of power on a world scale through history, or did you get into that sort of thing? You can study political science at the local level of the county, county clerk's office or something, but you understand, did you deal with geopolitical theory?
I studied international relations and comparative politics, where you compare the political systems of different countries.
Right.
And I was very focused also on history.
Okay, well, that's good. Well, then the history, you get a sense of continuity and that kind of thing. Right. Hasn't it always been, if I may, Russ, hasn't it always been, it seems to me, because I did geopolitics and that kind of thing, it's always been that you do have a small elite in virtually every political entity in the world that runs things.
That's right.
And we had emperors in Rome, we had kings in the feudal period, then we have the financial banking, we had England, but it's always been just a small group that runs things, and most of the people are running around like serfs on a feudal estate.
But isn't it amazing when you think about it that in this country there is almost no discussion on a broad level about this phenomenon?
Family of Secrets.
Well, Family of Secrets does exactly that. That's really what the book is about.
Yeah,
it's about the elites that secretly shape our lives, our policy, and our world, and how the Bushes played a role in this and how that is not understood.
Major issue, isn't it now? Particularly now in this time of transformation. Yeah.
Because everything is treated as separate, discrete events. You know, a person is just elected, and he's there, an individual doing whatever he does until he's no longer there. And one of the things I do in Family of Secrets is I actually ended up sort of going down a rabbit's hole, and I never expected to do this. And I discovered linkage between a lot of different events, and I found that one of the things that really surprised me was the extent to which presidents of the United States, and I mean all presidents, are under tremendous pressure from these elites. This is something we don't see. It's not discussed on the evening news or on the talk shows, and they are on tremendous pressure. And I think they understand this. And we see presidents being assassinated, removed, destroyed by scandal. Almost every recent president, something has happened to him when he was really doing things that did not comport with the agendas of some of these powerful entities, be they military contractors,
think that
be
applies
they
to Mr. John F. Kennedy?
I do think so. I didn't, by the way, I didn't know that before. And prior to writing this book, I have to say I never really paid much attention to the Kennedy assassination.
I hadn't either.
I always thought, you know what, this is too much of a mess. It's too complicated. There's hundreds or thousands of books on this. Everybody's sort of raging debate. How could you ever get to the bottom of it? What happened was I began being fascinated with a memo that J. Edgar Hoover had written, a declassified memo that referenced a briefing that had been given by the FBI on November 23, 1963. This is the day after Kennedy's assassination, and they were briefing them on issues related to Cubans and the Kennedy assassination, and it named the two intelligence officers who were briefed. One of them, the name was George Bush of the CIA. Now, this is 13 years before he becomes CIA director, supposedly as a so-called intelligence virgin. And so I was intrigued, is this the same fellow, and what does this mean?
Isn't that part of the curriculum for the elite to be able to be thinking about the levers of real power? I mean, those who go to Harvard and so forth, that this becomes part of the education. They would be aware of that kind of reality. Hans Morgenthau and the people that write on realpolitik and all this kind of thing would be part of the training for our future leadership, political leadership, wouldn't it be?
Absolutely. I mean, Yale, for example, where multiple generations of Bushes went, was the principal recruiting ground for the Central Intelligence Agency.
I think that's right. Yeah, you're right.
And there are loads of people, by the way, in the media and everywhere else who were there, who joined these secret societies like Skull and Bones and were being asked if they would like to join the intelligence services. And in Family of Secrets, I get into some media figures who at least have, shall we say, the fingerprints of more than just media work who come out of this milieu. And so anyway, with the Kennedy assassination, and of course we don't have time to get into it, I have 4 chapters in Family of Secrets of new information, all documented, about the JFK assassination as it relates to CIA circles around the elder Bush.
Well, there'd be a lot of people interested in that, because there's a lot of people still interested in that issue, much less Mr. King and Mr. Robert Kennedy, and there's a and then up even to 9/11 truth. You got this whole 9/11 truth.
Yeah, that's not a subject I really think. But I must say the Kennedy thing. You know, the House Select Committee on Assassinations, in their final report, concluded that in all probability there was some kind of conspiracy. In other words, even they concluded, and I believe 70% of the American public believes, that Lee Harvey Oswald did not act alone. What I get into in this book is specifically following a trail of friends of the elder Bush who were friends of Lee Harvey Oswald, people who, by the way, there's another memo I discovered where on the day of the assassination, George H.W. Bush, he actually, by the way, he's sort of famous for having said he can't remember where he was on November 22, 1963.
Really? I didn't know.
Yeah, everybody remembers where they were, but he has consistently said he didn't remember.
I certainly do, right.
You know? And so, but where he was Dallas, actually.
He
was in Dallas, and he left Dallas that morning, and he traveled to a city near Dallas where he then, right about the time they announced that the president had been assassinated, he went into a payphone and he called the FBI, said he wanted to remain anonymous, but he wished to report a possible suspect in the assassination. The man he named, who he said he didn't know much about, was actually a man he did know, and by all the indications, he knew that this fellow was entirely harmless, was over in Houston, which is a long way away from Dallas, and was actually a volunteer in his county Republican headquarters. And he knew this fellow, and he knew he was harmless, and so why did he make this call?
So he's trying to do some cover for
Well,
him?
you know, I want to leave some of the suspense for your readers. Family Secrets has 4 chapters on this. But then then I go forward and I look at him in another context, which is he shows up again in 1973, 74. Richard Nixon is now having problems with Watergate. And George Bush is asked to become, or asks to become, the head of the Republican Party. And yet, even though he's the head of the Republican Party in this very sensitive moment, the history books have no mention of him. He's not mentioned in practically any of the books about Nixon. There's maybe one sentence or something. And I thought, well, how could that be? He's running the Republican Party during the cover-up. What's his role, and how does he evade scrutiny? And so this then creates several more chapters in the book where I discover that, in fact, he and a lot of his associates were angry at Nixon. And it turns out, and again, this totally astonished me, that Richard Nixon was not exactly the person I thought he was. He was a much more complex individual. He had basically been, his political career had been made possible by the Bush family going back to the 1940s. I discovered in my research that Prescott Bush, who you mentioned, the grandfather, had been involved in Nixon's hometown buying a company and a defense contractor right at the moment that Richard Nixon was selected to run for Congress in the first place.
What a funny, wow.
The reason,
what a crazy quilt.
And the reason was because the man that they wanted to run against was deeply involved in calling for more regulation of Wall Street and banking.
Right.
And talk about a timely subject.
Right, absolutely, with everything that's going on
He was saying, we can't afford another Great Depression, we need to regulate these outfits. And they didn't want to be regulated.
Could I ask a sidebar again? I think Frank Church, I did a program with Frank Church when he had that investigation of the CIA and everything. Did you get into that at all? Did it shed any light? Was it useful to you understanding this secret government in a certain sense?
Well, Frank Church was a very honorable man.
He was indeed. Forrest Church's son is here in New York now.
Very brave, and he tried to get to the bottom of a lot of these things. Tragically, he died not that long after that from cancer. But he really made quite a go, and I think it was responsible for heightening public awareness of the dangers of having this sprawling and vast and essentially black intelligence apparatus that we don't know anything about, and frankly that our elected officials don't know.
Was he very effective in getting any, did he help you in terms of your research, and did he open any doors for you to be able to go down that rabbit hole?
Well, sure, because they asked a lot of questions, and they exposed the fact that the CIA was doing things like testing things like truth serums and various drugs to see Manchurian candidate-type drugs on unwitting citizens. And, first of all, that's terrifying, but second of all, that raises all these questions about if they're trying to create a Manchurian candidate, do we really understand the history of the United States where so many presidents have been shot? There are so many attempts on them, and in every single case they always say it was a lone kook. Yet in every other country where some head of state is taken out, it's always not a lone kook. It's always somebody representing powerful interests.
Doesn't ring true to the real truth.
Well, it doesn't make any sense statistically or logically.
The Contra affair, the Nicaragua and that, did you get into that? Was he involved? His fingerprints on that and that?
Well, he's the
father's up to Reagan and all that. But,
the father's always been a master of plausible deniability.
They all are, aren't they? If they
he famously said, "I was out of the loop." And I took Bob Woodward to task for this, and by the way, I have some interesting revelations about Bob Woodward himself, because one of the things I discovered in the course of doing this, and this really blew my mind, was that the whole Watergate thing was not what I understood it to be.
Plumbers.
Well, no. That, in fact, Richard Nixon had nothing to do with Watergate, with any of these break-ins, that he was basically a fellow who was charting a kind of an independent course. Once he became president, he decided this is his moment for a legacy, as I think they all do.
He went to China in '72.
He started doing all kinds of things that were rather radical. He created environmental policy for the United States. He set up the EPA. He set up a new labor regulations, health regulations. He did a lot of things that normally you might have thought a Democrat would do. And what I learned was that Richard Nixon was angering his old sponsors.
I don't know what to call them, the fundi, I would call them. That's like the fundi out of feudal Europe. I mean, it's old money, old families. They go way back. They got dynastic notions, and they're there, and they're very operative in a covert way for running the world.
Well, paradoxically, just as John F. Kennedy had angered these old interests by being an independent president, Richard Nixon Kennedy's old nemesis, gets in and also does the same thing. And he's got this back-channel negotiations. He and Kissinger, the Pentagon is out of the loop. They're very angry about it. The defense contractors are worried because, you know, when you have peace, you know, we have an economy that's largely
would be the worst thing we can imagine.
Largely based on war, you know.
Yeah, right.
And so they start becoming uncomfortable with him. The oil men are uncomfortable with him because he's really not that dedicated to the things that really are most important to them, the oil depletion allowance.
That was huge.
And the oil import quotas. And I actually found, and I quote in Family of Secrets, documents, diaries from Haldeman and Ehrlichman, where they actually, you're talking to Nixon, and Nixon says, don't trust these oil guys. It's fascinating.
Really? That's a quote, right? You got that in quote.
Yeah. He tells them, and they take notes, and they write, beware of these guys. They're not your friends. You know? And so you begin to see that even Richard Nixon, was right from the moment he got in office, the other thing he was doing, which is fascinating, was he was fighting with the CIA. From the moment he became president, he was demanding files on the Bay of Pigs and on the Kennedy assassination, and they didn't want to turn them over, and he was upset with them. And so what we see with Watergate, and again, I don't want to spoil this for the readers. That's why he started doing the
tapes, or no?
Well, no. The tapes were, you know, Johnson had tapes and Kennedy had tapes.
Right.
The tapes was not his idea. Somebody said to him, you know, you really should. He didn't want to have tapes. And they said to him, you know, you really should have tapes so you have a record of what's said.
Right,
which makes perfect sense. I mean, I tape things.
They ought to be videotaping it all, if I may.
So they made him seem like a criminal for having tapes in the first place when it was completely logical. They basically, what I believe now, as a result of my research for Family of Secrets, I believe that Richard Nixon was framed.
Okay.
I believe that Richard Nixon was framed by more conservative, more establishment interests. And it's not that I believe that. It's that the facts that I assembled in the course of my research, when you put them all together, you can't come to any other conclusion. And so I've got several chapters with all new information about Watergate.
Oh, all right, that's good. It comes that, and then it comes up to the Bush legacy of the last few years.
Right, but you see, the Bush legacy of the last few years is really an outgrowth of this earlier phenomenon. And all of these things that we see, the torture, the secrecy, the unauthorized wiretapping of American citizens, we now are finding out it was much more widespread.
We had COINTELPRO way back when in Martin King's day.
These are all the enterprises of people who don't respect democracy.
Right.
They don't respect openness. They don't respect the good judgment of the public.
I don't think the aristos at Versailles appreciated the idea of democracy very much.
Well, you know, there's a
coming out of the
struggle.
feudal period, I don't think the emperors of Rome appreciated it.
Well, none of them do, of course.
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to say.
There's always a struggle between the public interest and the objectives and the interests.
Did I use the line already with you that James Joyce said, "History is a nightmare from which I'm attempting to awaken"? History is that way. I mean, and maybe we had something in pre-empire days of, you know, Oriental despotism and all that with some democracy, but it's always been a few people run everything, and they still do.
Well, as George Orwell made the point.
George Orwell,
they
God
always,
bless him.
one of the things they do is they distract us. You know, we spend more time talking about a football game than when we would ever spend talking about this book. And I watch people go into bookstores, and, you know, they may see the book, they may even have heard about it, and they look at it for a second, and then they turn to something about diet, about how to get your financial thing in order, because ultimately we're focused on our own personal security and our own comfort, and that's understandable. But unfortunately, it's not very good for
And the
for
thing
history.
is, and we also have, if you just think it philosophically, I don't know where the hell Voltaire or wherever, big thinking people and everything. I like Fuller. Bucky Fuller, Marshall McLuhan were good, and all these kind of things like that. But, I mean, we now have a unique capability of the Homo sapiens to extend consciousness through technology, make the world different than in the Eden-like sense is given, which is a lot of most all the creatures. And now we've got, and much of the research and the development and the covert and the black ops and all of that is in support of research and support for weapon systems that will give an advantage to a certain tribe to go steal the grain from the other people for their tribe, that kind of thing. And we now have weapon systems. I wish you could research. Maybe you have. You're very dogged and so forth. That it is true that the weapon systems that exist collectively here on planet Earth and so forth now have, and since about the year 1970 now, are species lethal. Do you believe that's true? That if there was a mix-up, Guns of August, Barbara Tuchman, kind of thing, alliances, and the weapons were in some spasm of hatred unleashed, that it is modeling that we have a capability now to eliminate entirely the human species with weapons that exist.
Well, I mean, obviously we've had that since the unleashing of the atom, but we also have it in terms of all these biological agents and so forth.
Pardon? I'm sorry?
We also have it in terms of all these biological agents. We have a lot of different...
Yeah, on top of the hydrogen and the teller and all of that, that have been built biologically. So the point being, in the Second World War, we couldn't. We were trying. Vonnegut, God bless him, you know, bombing Dresden, firebombing Tokyo, and that kind of. We were trying to kill each other as best we possibly could. These elites that are running the thing and getting people ginned up for war and that kind of thing. But it's come into some existential new reality when you've got weapons that, if they were, we couldn't do it in the Second World War.
Yeah,
I was born.
Yeah.
In such a short time, against 200,000 years of human existence.
Yeah.
We get to an existential new point in terms of the evolution of our technological extended capability. Do you understand?
Absolutely.
And then something on the positive side, we got a capability of doing for all the people and the ecology and all the creatures a capability that our old inherited systems don't allow us to realize. We don't have a system in order. Our economic system just been hit upside the head. Something on the positive side could be like that this is really a very unique time to be a live participant and conscious in the evolution of consciousness itself.
This is an interesting time to be alive. It's an interesting time because we are actually much more empowered than we realize.
The people? The people you mean by we?
Yes, sir.
The we.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Because the Internet has changed everything.
I like to think
we can communicate with each other as long as they do not shut down the Internet, and that's something that always worries me.
Not only the Internet, if I may, but public access cable television, where you
public
and I are
access
getting some of this word out in a little way that we couldn't have dreamed of only 10, 20 years ago.
Absolutely. We couldn't talk about these things. And, you know, and there, as I say, there's this constant struggle, but the Internet allows people to communicate with each other, to organize, to gather information. And one of the things that we're doing, I've started a nonprofit group called The Real News Project. Our website is whowhatwhy.com.
Yeah, it's great. I've been there.
And I had to put it aside a little bit trying to finish the book, but in the coming months, we're going to go forward. We're going to ask the public to fund us so that we can do investigations into all of these subjects. You're talking about the proliferation of weapons systems, who runs things, all of these questions. What's the story behind the Wall Street? Is there no more story behind the Wall Street collapse? How do we explain the failure to address global warming? All of these issues can be confronted by human beings working together.
Well, I wonder, in intellectual, they confront it, but the thing, we can get all specialized out into various things, so we don't, where are the voices with a historical understanding of where the major transformations are there? I don't find them, you know. We're all caught up with the rumor of the day or that kind of thing, or specialization. Fuller used to say they get everybody specialized out because they won't become a threat to the people who think globally and run the world. And they're not worried about the dullards coming up, but they get the smart ones doing something that's so specialized out they can't think about the whole and become a threat. Where are the the intellectual community is falling down on the job without coming up with a systems understanding of what the hell is going on and what is needed in the realm of economic policy, some way in which we can deal with the future rather than just being enthralled to the past and that kind of thing. But it's the intellectual community, because you wouldn't expect the political leadership to do that, would you? Or the business leadership?
Well, certainly not.
Our so-called leadership, but the intellectuals are falling down on the job.
One of the problems is that we tend to anoint gatekeepers. And so there's a handful of these people, the so-called historians and so on, experts, they say, who constantly are on television, on all the big shows, and they sort of suck up all the bandwidth, and they provide these very conventional explanations of things. And, of course, when I call these people, some of these historians, and I say, I'd like to run some of the things by you that I've discovered, and they say, gee, you know, you're too deep for me. I don't know this stuff. And I think, well, why are you the one who's always on these programs establishing the parameters?
Those are the people that are approved by the White House for you to talk to about Mr. Bush, right? It's a thing. It's understandable they would do that. You wouldn't condemn a crocodile for eating an antelope in a sense. They're doing what they're trained to do. But what I'm saying is you have a sense of the same sense of this being an incredibly transformative time. I got a friend, Coley Clark. She aired yesterday here. She's from Mississippi, worked with Kwame Ture, Martin King. She said down south, she's from down south, you got to hit a mule upside the head to get its attention. The system that runs the planet has been hit upside the head now with this financial thing.
That's right.
And don't you think it opens up a possibility for really comprehensively involved thinking from the intellectual community. Yeah. Your book is part of that. It was, I would suggest, very timely. How did you get it timed so that it came out just as he left office? Did it come out on the same day he left office?
No, it actually was the official publication date is January 6th.
Oh, you missed it.
Which would have which gave us 2 weeks before he left office.
Yeah, but that's from 5 years out.
Yeah.
There's something in there that says it was very timely and other things like that. But do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
That it's a time of great opportunity.
Can I tell you something, Harold? It's even more timely now that he's out of office for a very simple reason. Barack Obama is not just a man who can do whatever he wants. And people don't understand this. I have high hopes for his administration.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
But I have to say...
he has the accoutrements of a class act.
Absolutely. But I have to say this. He also has to operate with the approval of Wall Street, of military contractors, of the Pentagon. He cannot go too far in angering them. No president can.
That's right.
And what I think Family of Secrets, I hope, will contribute to our discussion as we go forward, is to sort of uncloak this apparatus of permanent power that is always agitating to get what it wants. And I can tell you that there are going to be people in there. I interviewed people for the Watergate chapter, Republican Party officials, who told me that the intelligence community has always worked to get their own people, unbeknownst to the president, into the White House in positions so they can keep an eye on him. And this is not only, of course, some of this is sinister, but it's also for security reasons, because they worry, what if the president goes on a drinking binge or he accidentally pushes the button or something? So
that button I'm very concerned with.
Yeah.
Because that could be done by somebody in Pakistan now or in Israel or something.
But when you have people who are unknown to the public, unknown to the president, who are in there surrounding him, the danger, of course, just as there's some security concern, there's also the danger that these people are serving interests that are different from ours. And this is a concern. What is Barack Obama? What is going to happen if he shakes things up too much? If he really, if he were to talk, for example, about the fact that the rich in this country really don't pay their fair share compared to any other advanced country in the world, and then we see the consequences. The New York Times today saying that even with the chaos on Wall Street, there's still all these huge bonuses being paid. I mean,
Citicorp wanted a $50 million jet.
Too big to fail.
The too big to fail thing. Yeah, in a certain sense. So on another hand, there's got to be something existentially going on where. If you're presenting an alternative, let's suppose you're really thinking about an alternative, not just a little changing of the deck chairs on the Titanic or something, or some criticism of what's there, because virtually everything is under fire now. Every institution, everybody, foreclosures, all kinds of things. But if you're going to present an alternative, then it would have to be an alternative that would be not only in a certain, let's just say, liberating, if that's a term, again, the existential side of that destructive scenario, of a liberation of, let's say, the people who've been not able to be realizing their potential on a large scale, the human beings of that, within touch with the ecology, liberating of things that the technology could make available that we now have capability for, but we don't have systems that allow it to do it. But the real challenge would be to come with something that would do that, liberate us into a new way, or have a vision of a liberation, but it would be one that would be able to appropriately subsume the outdated historical institutions, so that you would get to the point where it would be something that everybody could understand and resonate to in a way where there would be no losers. Everybody would be able to understand it. And that seems to me like the work of the intellectuals.
Absolutely.
The intellectual vision is not there.
It's not there.
They're repairing to Keynes, they're repairing to all the old thinking. They got Summers and all that kind of stuff. The economic theory isn't in terms with what is needed. That kind of, they don't have a vision relevant to what the future requires.
Well, what's
you understand? It's not, but it's not them. Excuse me, it's not them. It's the intellectuals. It's you and I.
What's disappointing?
You're trying, and
what's disappointing is that this is kind of a low period in terms of brain power. We see this with just watch the public discussions. The discussion is so it's so narrow, and they're not stepping back and asking the bigger questions. And so you see this with the Iraq War. I mean, these people very clearly, and by the way, in Family of Secrets, I have a number of chapters with new information about the Iraq War, why they went into Iraq, and so on. And I interview a fellow who was writing a book with George W. Bush in 1999, before he was even president, and way before 9/11, way before all these things. His name is Mickey Herskowitz. He's a Texas journalist. author.
Yeah.
And Mickey confided to me that when he was working on the book with Bush and asking Bush about what he wanted to do if he was elected and so on, that Bush told him that if he was elected, the only thing he could really think of, in fact, that he wanted to do, the only thing he mentioned was that he wanted to invade Iraq.
Oh, well, Wolfowitz... Paul
but that's different.
Wolfowitz was talking about invading Iraq in the 70s.
True.
And they were the lunatic fringe.
Right.
And they were thought of as laughable.
Right.
But they were talking about invading Iraq in the 1970s. That neocon coalition seemed to capture his thinking.
But he's not a neocon.
He wasn't a neocon, but they captured him.
Well, they captured him to some extent. But
with the evangelicals.
The reason that he did it was, as he indicated to his at the time ghostwriter, was that he understood that if you prosecuted a successful war, you would score points politically. That it was crucial to a successful presidency domestically to have a war. So this is a whole different issue. This is one of these new revelations. And you mentioned the evangelicals. I have a chapter in Family of Secrets where I interview the Bush family advisor on evangelicals, and it turns out that George W. Bush would never have been president if he had not captured this large evangelical
40% of his base, I think. 40% of his constituency.
Right, but what we don't know, and what I discovered in the course of my research, is that you see, he captured them because he announced that he had become born again. But according to this man who was their advisor, we went through and created a whole timeline and looked at memos he'd been writing to them. He was writing memos to the Bush family on the importance of them embracing evangelical Christianity prior to the year in which
George W. Bush?
He was writing memos to the Bush family. At the time, Bush Sr. Was vice president, but was angling to become president.
I'm sorry, who was writing it? Who was writing the memo?
Oh, a fellow named Doug Weed.
Oh, okay.
And he was an advisor to the elder Bush.
Yeah. Well, there were people who were,
And he was himself an evangelical, and he was telling him, you have to embrace this, you have to talk about, you have to basically appear to be much more religious than you are. And he told them this, and he would write memos to them. And at the time, people don't realize this, one of George H.W. Bush's top advisors, one of the people he listened to the most was none other than his son, George W. Bush, the ne'er-do-well.
My God.
He was a very savvy political strategist, and he understood things often that his father didn't understand.
Right. Okay, that's interesting. That's very interesting. I'm really looking forward to.
Again, what I try to do is only put in things I didn't know. Because why put in things I already know? Why put in things other people already know?
Other things people know. It's better to get the things you don't. It's the information. Gregory Bates used to say, information that makes a difference is it real information that makes a difference and everything like that. Congratulations on your long and distinguished career as a writer. And I'm going to say once again, everyone ought to get tuned into Russ Baker. He writes like an angel. And I'm just saying that, having been kept up late at night reading your many articles you've written. But you've written a major book now. We live in a media world now. Is it stuff of, have you got any movie deals? Have you thought of movie deals for this? Have you gotten in touch with multimedia possibilities for the ideas that are being presented in the book or not?
We've been approached by some people.
It's not been optioned.
Who've spoken. It's too early. We've just really begun. The book is just
but you got to start thinking ahead.
Well, we've been approached by several.
Prescient young man.
We've been approached by several people who are interested in making documentaries. Other people who have Hollywood connections who see possibility of a feature film here. We also, this may interest your viewers, that we want to do some sort of viral videos for YouTube about the book and about the issues in the book, and we may even have a contest or something if people have ideas or they'd like to create their own videos about
I just found out I put things up. I got 500. Yours will be up by this weekend. This interview will be up by YouTube by this weekend and everything. And I got one I did with a fellow I did here, taped in the studio, and it's now gotten over 2 million people viewing it all over the world. It's staggering. It goes by the thousands that they do. YouTube's very important, a very important source of doing. But I was thinking more about the media or mediating this kind of thing.
Right. And of course, we're talking about other things. We may do a graphic novel, which is a sort of an adult comic book telling the story visually.
Right.
I know one of the top graphic novelists, and he's interested in doing
That'd
something.
Be good.
So
That's a very
we may do that. There's lots of
ways to communicate, and you do all of this. And are you doing much media now? You're thinking YouTube now. You're thinking multimedia.
Yeah, I'm also doing old media, and I'm doing internet. I mean, we've been on a lot of the websites, from Huffington Post to Alternet to what have you.
Yeah.
And I also have been writing some essays where I address some of the issues here and then relate them to things that are going on, say, this week.
Right.
And we put those up on the web.
You don't do a regular column or anything
I don't
on a
do
blog or anything like that?
No, you know, we've got this website.
There's only so many hours in the day.
Yeah. And we've got this website, familyofsecrets.com.
Yes.
And what we do there is we put links to interviews that I've been doing. I did one Reuters television. Reuters is the largest news organization in the world.
Yes.
They did a special on the Bush legacy.
Wonderful.
And I was the first person on camera
Wonderful.
talking about the Bush legacy.
Good. Get
and they
on
distributed
camera.
that all over the world.
Get on
so I
camera.
did that.
Yeah.
Done a number of television shows here in New York, New York One.
You've done
did
some things
Inside
with Laura
City
Flounders.
Hall. I did Laura Flanders.
Yeah.
Inside City Hall and New York
video.
One.
Video.
Yeah.
Video. It was television.
It was television.
You ought to get yourself on television.
I've been doing a lot of radio.
Yeah.
Lots of different programs.
You haven't had a call from Tavis Smiley or Charlie Rose or something on television?
I have not had a call from those particular shows yet, but we are talking to all kinds of shows.
Yeah.
I was featured in the Washington Post, believe it or not. A very establishment institution.
Yes.
Did a full-page
review of the book. But what did they think of it?
You know, one can never expect that establishment institutions are going to wholeheartedly embrace
Welcome the barbarians at the gate.
That suggests that the old media missed so much.
Yeah, right.
However, the review was largely favorable, and he acknowledged the seriousness of the material, my own credibility.
Yeah.
He said he thought I had overreached a little bit,
well,
but they have to say that.
Yeah, of course.
We've had a number of good reviews. Just had one in the San Diego newspaper. And we also have had, the Washington Post called me back and had me do a podcast.
Wonderful.
They had me do an online chat. I was the only non-Post staffer that did an online chat with their readers, along with Woodward and some of the other folks there.
Okay, good. Very good. Well, listen, you've written a major book. You've had a great career. I congratulate you all the very best. And let us see. Do you mind if I show up close and personal the book? Maybe you can even read the small print if you can. Your pleasure at the perceptions of major investigative force in American and world society. Russ Baker, he's recommended about as highly as is possible to recommend a particular person's writing and contributions. Thank you very much for coming in, Russ, for all your work and for this book. I think it's going to become, it's only out a couple weeks or something now. I think I predict great things for this book and the person who put it together.
Thank you very much.
My pleasure. Your pleasure. We'll be coming back again tomorrow. Please tune in. We'll be coming back again tomorrow. Once again, Russ, thank you very, very much for coming. Great pleasure. Well, it's like a birth, right? You had 5 years. It's like a 5-year gestation. It must be great to have it out, huh?
Yeah.
When did you finally see the galleys and everything? And got finished?
We had to do it pretty fast because we were running late. So. I saw the galleys maybe in September, or even October. I mean, it was really rushed, and they were sort of frantic about whether they're going to get it printed in time.
Right.
But fortunately, I mean, one of the things that happened was I think that when the economy tanking, the printers have more available, you know. So we benefited.
Well, it seems like the stars are aligned, don't you feel? Well, you must feel pretty good about things
right now. Feeling pretty good. Yeah,
okay, that's good. Yeah. Well, keep up the good work.
Thank you.
You keep your powder dry, and let's stay in touch.
All right.
Terrific. Okay. Wait a minute, we got to let them see the graphics and so forth. And I really enjoyed meeting. We're going to be talking with Gerard Colby. You know Gerard.
Well, he's an old friend, actually.
Yeah, he's a good guy.
His wife, Charlotte, was helpful in research for the book.
Oh, right. Very good. Very good.
Yeah.
Well, let's see if we can line them up. And public access is a place for multimedia, for some ideas to get. That's where the ideas are going to come from more than the networks. That's
well,
what
it's
I
all
think.
fragmenting.
You all should get behind supporting the political support for public access as an institution in our society. It's very important. Leading edge, before the Internet.
Right.
They were out on the frontier.
I agree. I agree. I've always found interesting things on public access.
Okay. Well, that's really good.